Good.
I'll start my clock when you're ready then.
Okay, guys, we have the next speaker, really, from Umami Games, co-founder or founder. Am I right? Yeah, co-founder. Please, really, you can start your speech, but from hypercasual to casual. A very interesting and provocative topic, I must admit.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here today. Yeah, as you said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Umami Games, and yeah, I will be talking about how one can pivot from hyper casual to casual. So it'll be a little bit about like the differences and similarities in the production phase, and how rapid development, this lean approach that we use in hyper casual, can also be used in casual. Yeah, so and of course it can be a controversial subject, but I think lately we've seen a lot of hyper casual studios still doing, of course, hyper casual, but also some pivoting both to casual or blockchain. Yeah, so I'll try to take you through where Umami is today. But to begin with, a little bit about myself. As I said, I'm CEO and co-founder of Umami Games. As an educational background, I have a bachelor in interactive digital media. So that's when I made my first game. So you can come in the industry a little late and still make it. I have a master in game design from ITU, and I have around 6 years of industry experience. We founded Umami Games in 2019, and before that, I was part of another startup. And then before that, I worked at Tactile Games. So today, I would say my main focus, what I'm working with, is design, business, marketing, then data and vision, like in a combination. I think if I move on to the next slide about Umami Games, it will make sense that since you are a team of 8, you have a lot of different tasks. And our biggest hit so far, our game so far, has been ABC Runner, which was first on the US chart around a year, 1.5 ago. We entertained around 13.5 million players in 2021, and we have made more than 81 hyper casual games. And from the beginning, actually, our vision has always been to be this creative powerhouse. We're located in the north, and we really believe in gathering a lot of talent in one house and then just making amazing games. We've always focused on these free-to-play mobile games. It's a huge market. We really like mobile games, and we also come from the free-to-play mobile games world from Tactile. And right now we're focusing on casual puzzle games. So that's very different from hyper casual. But then again, there's also a lot of similarities. And it's been around a month where we've been working with these casual games, because we're in an exclusive publishing deal before, which ended. So now we had to rethink what our vision was and what our goal was. And then to start, I think it makes sense to like sum up the game development process we use. And actually, I would say this is very much the same, both in hyper casual and casual. Or we normally start with this brainstorming, prototyping, and testing, like sort of phase 1. Then, if that goes well, we move on with the game into more like a soft launch. You iterate on the game, add more monetization features. Of course, if it doesn't go well in phase 1, you throw it out and start that process over again. And then in phase 3, it's all about scaling. And here today I'll be talking mainly about phase 1, because that's also where we are, since we've only been in it for a month. But in phase 3, I really see a big difference, because in casual you maintain the game way longer than you do in hyper casual. So there will be a big difference. However, as you will see, I think the phase 1 process is very similar. So let's dive into it. And I think in order to talk about this brainstorm and prototyping, we need to start by talking about what design is. So on top, I have a design document of a game we made called Shitty Jobs, like a classic claw mechanic that goes down in a poop and need to swipe as much as possible. But I just think it's interesting to quickly touch upon the fact that, at least for me, there's a difference in creativity and art, whereas when you make art, you don't necessarily have a player in mind. And I would say with design and creativity, you need to have a player in mind. You need to know who you're designing for. Then it's like a combination of psychology and rules, like knowing how people think and being good at imagining what would be nice for that target audience, but also following X amount of design rules that are already written. It could also be rules in society. For example, if you read from the left to the right, then if you keep having the text the other way, stuff like that. And being aware of that, I think, is super essential whether you make hyper casual or casual games. Then I think it could be interesting to talk about what could inspire good design, because for me, I think in hyper casual, a big difference is that the margin you have in hyper casual, like when the first test you go for a CPI, and you need to figure out approximately how much money will you then make. So that margin between the CPI and the LTV is small in hyper casual. So it's very, very important that you have a good CPI, or at least that those metrics have a good margin. So at least from our experience, you need to be very aware of what's going on in the world, social media trends, to make sure that you get that low CPI. Where in casual, it's a little bit different. You're not as dependent on the lowest CPI out there. Of course, the margin still needs to make sense, but since you have normally a way higher LTV, you will also have more room. So I would still say in the core, I guess everything could be inspired. You can still use the same inspirations, but in casual, I feel like now we use a lot of time playing the top 50 grossing puzzle games, and I feel like they're more similar than if you look at the top 50 on the top 3 charts. But that would be my opinion. Then I think talking a little bit about innovation and where to innovate is super relevant, because it's something that we use a lot both in hyper casual and casual. So to the right, for example, I have a game called Worded Bridge, which is heavily inspired from the game Wordle. So in this one, for example, I would say 90% of this game is one-to-one inspired from the Wordle game. But then there's 10% innovation on the visuals, right? We tried putting it into another setting. And I think for both genres, that's very relevant to think about how much innovation will you make, and where in all the buttons you can tweak, like rules, input, mechanic, visuals, will you be making that innovation, of course. And one thing we also notice is that in both genres, I think having a clear reference game is really key, so you know what you're trying to design a new version of. Of course, I guess you can have 90% innovation, but I think especially on mobile, that tends to be, you tend to base it on some design rules that are already out there that are working. So I think that's some really good things to be aware about as a designer, both in hyper casual and casual. Let me just see here. 1 second. All right. Then how do you design the games? I mean, of course, there's a ton of different approaches to designing a game, but actually we use sort of like the same approach, both in hyper casual and casual. And this is this mix and match thing. Sometimes it happens in your head without it being so visual as it is here. But I think the whole point is, how can you mix and match different traits and genres and composition and inputs and make a new experience? So for example, how would a first-person typing game look like? And how would a RPG typing game look like? It could maybe even be a combination of all three. But using these to like mix and match really sparks the innovation and the creativity around coming up with designs. So I think that's a cool method to follow actually in both directions. Then another trick I would say is that you really need to make sure to play it before you make it, if possible, right? And in our experience, since we've been making casual puzzle games, there's a lot of these you can actually test before, also with hyper casual. So for example, this is a game called Emoji Run. And what we did there is we took up our phone. There's a design document, of course, up here. But we took up our phone and we just asked one of my teammates, like, okay, a game from the north. An animal from the north. Can you find it? And then that person needs to find. So trying to play the game before. You can also do a lot with pen and paper. when it's puzzles. Because already there you sort of get an idea of whether does this game seem fun or not, and if it doesn't, kill it. If it does, move forward with it. And that is the whole like lean or rapid development approach that I would keep using both in casual and hyper casual, because I believe that's the way you find new great designs. Then design documents, right? I mean, for us, that approach has also been the same. It's about brainstorming, coming up with an idea, then the best ideas out of all your brainstorms, you make design documents of. So this is for a hyper casual game called Flagpole Runner. But having something as simple as this gives a really good indicator of how would the feeling be. Of course, in hyper casual, we focus a lot on the ads. How would the ad look? What would be the killing moment in the ad? Which for this one would be when you grab someone else's flagpole to get further in the levels, kind of hack your way through it. So that I will definitely use in both of them. I'll also show one for a casual game later. So just to sum it up a little bit here in the middle is that really get it on device. I think that's both for casual and hyper casual, that it's so hard to judge whether a game is fun and feels nice in a Unity editor. So getting it on device as fast as possible is key. And the whole goal is, of course, to kill our darlings as fast as possible, because then we can move on only forward with the games that actually seems promising. So we make sure that we prioritize our time as best as possible. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about this rapid development approach, right? Because what is it actually, and how do you work fast? So for me, I think the biggest takeaway, both in hyper casual and also here in casual, now it's a little different in casual, but how do you prioritize your work? Like when does who do what? So for example, if you have a game being casual or hyper casual, the first thing you do is, would that use 2 weeks on UI, making like the perfect UI, and making some amazing levels and really polishing those things up. If you're not even sure that the input feels nice or the mechanic really works, so it's about being aware of which buttons is there to tweak on in a production, and when should you prioritize what. I will get into a little later of what I think is the ideal prioritization when making prototypes. But I would say it's the same methods for casual, right? You need to be aware of how to prioritize the task and when to do what. And of course, be aware of bottlenecks, which is when the rest of the team is waiting for someone else. They cannot move forward because they're lacking, for example, art. So then another tip to speed up your process, which comes from hyper casual, but we found out you can use it in casual as well, is the asset store, right? Being aware that there's a ton of assets out there that you can use, download, pay a small money for, and then test out your assumptions. So for example, it could be if you have a casual game, maybe you are making the meta layer around it. And if it's, let's say, a classic match-3 game, would we then assume where the target audience is women? Would we then assume that a space theme is the most suitable one? I think there could, of course, there's a quality of the assets, but just to test out whether space is interesting for women, plus 25, for example, that you can test with Unity assets. So I think it's just very valid for both genres to actually use the asset store to get learnings faster from players. And then back to the whole how to actually structure the different buttons you can tweak. I think for us, we focus on the game loop, and that is in both genres. Like the mechanic and the input is the most important thing. Of course, you need to do minimal UI, minimal levels to make it work right, but I wouldn't start by making 100 levels. I wouldn't start by making the nicest effects, because what if no one thinks the game loop is fun? So it's about having that in mind, like what should be made when, and then can I test it? The earlier you can test, the better, right? Because if it doesn't work, you want to move on to something else that could potentially work. Of course, in the long run, you need to focus on the other things, but I'll get back to that. So I wanted to bring an example of a first playable. So of course this is hyper casual. It's but it could, I guess, since the word game, turn casual as well. But this is the Wordle bridge we saw from earlier, where we wanted to make the innovation on the visuals. So to begin with, we just wanted to get it on device. There was this trend in hyper casual. Just play it so you can see how it works. So I would claim and say it's not pretty at all. It's a very blue background, and yeah, it's not optimized at all. It also has the minimal UI that is needed to create the clarity that this is Wordle, right? But besides that, it's super simple. So at Umami, this is like a 1-2 day prototype, right? Because you want to get it out on a device, feel like it's fun. Does it feel like it has potential? If it does, you move on with it. If it doesn't, you throw it out. And of course, since it's Wordle, it might be cheating a little, or there's not that much innovation in the core, so I would assume it works. But I mean, when we made this, there wasn't that many on mobile. It was mainly on desktops. So yeah, I guess the point is that really focus on the most important task first, the game loop, and not using too much time on UI and polish and juicy effects, because it might be wasted work. Let me see if I can move on. Then if we move on to the first week of production, of course this is inspired from, this is hyper casual games, but we still do the same in casual, making playable so we can get out, get tested. You just keep playing the games. Now let me start this one while we're talking. So you can see this is a classic 1 week hyper casual prototype for us. We made several different, maybe one could even make it faster actually when I'm looking at it now. But this is what we would send out. I would just send this in testing with, I don't know, 10 levels, see how it goes, get the CPI on this one. On casual, I would test it a little differently, but I will still make sure to still work in sprints and make sure that I only keep on working on it if it seems promising. For us, we always used a lot of people sitting in the office, sitting in these open startup offices where we have playtesters. Now, since we have our own office, we only have game analytics to test on, but they're normally we're open to that. And then just another example of, I think this has sound, so I hope it won't be too loud, of also classic hyper casual simulation game, where you're like playing as a news host. I think that was also a week production just to test the CPI to see how far we are from having a good margin on this one. I think that was a fun mechanic actually. I don't think the CPI was as low as we hoped, but I think the creativity in the design was super great. As well, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's the first week of production. Getting something even more playable that looks, I mean, there's a big difference from this and the Wordle we just saw. So this, I would say, has already been focused on some polish and UI, right? So let's move on to the next one. So second week of production, right? It's because in hyper casual we had a lot of these 2-week sprints. Sometimes it was only a week, but I mean the method and the way to process things was still the same. If it was a bigger game, maybe it's 14, the 2 weeks. If it's smaller, maybe only a week or 3 days if possible. But for us, then second week of plan, we start using more time on the UI and the UX, because at least UI for us, I mean, it's very important for clarity, right? We had a game, for example, where if it's like a trivia game and you put a hand off the top, you cannot see which buttons you're playing on, you're pressing on, if the UI and the UX doesn't show me actively. So I think also the UX can do a lot for the stickiness of the game, like having a very strong loop. Yeah. So just to say how we would prioritize, we would do mechanics and input first, and then UI levels and polish in the end. So a bit more tips, I think, for speeding up your process. And I guess for hyper casual developers, this is very familiar, but I would say in casual, we've done the same as well. Start by making 10 or 15 good levels. think we tested casual games with 12 levels only. But the point is not to get a day one retention in the first test. The point is to validate this concept. If I've innovated on the core of it, is it even fun? Is it something that relates to the target audience? As well, this may be more for hyper casual, but optimizing everything like screenshots and the task, we keep doing this over and over again. Optimizing them using APIs and stuff is just, at least for us, it made our life way easier and faster when you make that many games with a smaller team. I don't think it's as needed in casual. It might be other things you want to automate, like your art pipeline, if that's possible, some of the rendering processes, but yeah. Then I think actually a big difference. So now we talked a lot about the similarities, right? And I think also be interesting to talk a little bit about the differences. Now we're coming towards the end where I will sum up. I would say something we really experience here in the testing phase is different. When hyper casual, I feel like there's two big ones. There's the click-through rate tests, which is tests you do on Facebook or TikTok, for example, where you just test the graphics of some. You have made a video, you've made a game that you can make videos of, but it's not necessarily playable. It could also be you only made the art, and then you test that just to see how many people actually click on that, how interesting are they at it, and what is the cost per click. And then that's the classic. I bring my games to the store very, very early. I test it, I read the results, I iterate, or I throw out. And that's the one, at least at Umami, we used the most the last year. And of course, casual, you will also do that at some point. But normally in casual, you have a bigger development period before that. What we have done, we have used more qualitative testing, so actually testing it on real players in the US that records the screen, they comment on how they play, they answer surveys. In hyper casual, we never did that. Maybe one should, though, but we never did it. So I think that's a big difference. Also, this talk about like soft launch in casual seems. My experience is that people use way more time before they actually go to the market with the game than in hyper casual, and that's of course some of the things we're trying to do a little different, because we believe we can go very early in the market and get valuable learnings. Of course, the requirement for the end product is way higher, but yeah. And I just wanted to touch upon how easy it is to test your games, whether it's casual or hyper casual, even as a small studio. You just implemented some event tracking, GA, Facebook, and GA is for free, right? Facebook is free as well, the SDK at least, not doing the campaigns. Make 2-4 videos, and of course there's a few manual tasks, but once you've done it a couple of times, it is pretty easy to pick it up and set up a campaign, which is also very intuitive on Facebook. Then to sum it up a little, so for example, this is the design document of Brick Runner, like a Lego brick inspired game, where you have this character that needs to collect bricks to get bigger, and then you need to fight a monster in the end. So in general, for hyper casual games, I would say they're short and sweet. They're YouTubeable, they have these bright colors, it's new and exciting game experiences, and they're super trends driven. And the target audience, everyone with a phone, which is actually pretty crazy to think about. I really like that in hyper casual, but we do see a bit more maybe now with these I Like Cake games. I would say they're leaning a bit more towards the male target audience. Maybe not the fashion one, but My Little Universe, for example. But overall, like target audience is everyone. And here's a casual puzzle game. I'm afraid I cannot show that many design document stuff because we're in production with everything, so it's very secret. But it's almost like symbolic how non-bright colors this has. Of course, in the final game, we'll have give it more colors. But it's just to give an idea of that this is a classic puzzle game called Collect 10. very inspired from the game called Zen Match. So these games are normally still easy to pick up, but they tend to be in the long run more challenging and more engaging than these hyper casual games in a long period of time. So they have more depth. Overall, I'll say this, like the quality of the art is higher, way higher, and the user base expects that. Also, like the final products have a ton of content, a lot of levels. The players expect that there will be regular updates of new themes and new content, etc. It also seems, from my perspective, this is totally biased just from what I've seen, that the casual games are more inspired by evergreens. So it's like these 5 or 10 evergreens, like a solitaire game or Mahjong, that have inspired a lot of these casual games. Whereas in hyper casual, I feel like there's a bit more variety in what people have come up with. And at least for us, the target audience is women plus 25 for these casual puzzle games. So let's sum it up quickly. The biggest differences between hyper casual and casual, I would say, is the quality, the type of innovation you do, and the way you test, and the longevity of the game. So in the end, that kind of boils down to profits, right? It's another business model. Casual games is mainly based on in-app purchases, so it's just way more revenue to be made in casual puzzle than in hyper casual, from what I've seen so far. And the biggest similarities, I'll say, is the whole design inspiration, right? It's still design, the way you make prototypes. You can use rapid development in both of them. Of course, there's some different methods within, for example, we do a lot of planning poker with casual. We didn't do that with hyper casual. But overall, I think the point is just, it's all about making awesome and engaging games. So, I mean, if that's the point, then, it shouldn't be that hard to pivot over. Of course, it's not a team size, or team composition, so you need more art in casual. But in the end, it's about making awesome and engaging games. And from our perspective, like, if there's just more profits in the casual games, yeah, we'll be going there. So I think that's around it for me. Maybe actually I even went over time a little, but I think we have a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, really. I would appreciate answering just a couple of questions we've got from the audience. And before that, thank you for this inspiring presentation and very clear analysis, and probably a short DIY for those who want to pivot. The first question is, how do you decide how much percent to innovate for a particular game?
And that is, I think it's super tough always to decide that. I feel like in casual, we've tried to do less innovation than we did before. So I would say as little as possible that you can do to still make a whole new experience is what I would go for. Just because the farther you get away from something that's proven, the more uncertainty there is, right? Bigger risk, bigger gain. So it will also, I guess, be up to maybe the runway of the studio and how you feel as a person.
Thank you. How much budget should be set for testing a casual game, and when should we approach publishers for it?
So, for us, that has actually been quite expensive, I feel like. With this, we use this service called Playtest Cloud. There's also something called Antidote, where basically they have a lot of players, so you can send up your game. You get these more qualitative tests, test. I think they have an indie pass, so we pay around $210 per test. And so far, we've done around 30 tests, so that has been quite expensive. For a casual game, as soon as you have, you could already send it out maybe with 10 or 20 levels, just to get an idea of, do they even play those levels, right? But more ideally, maybe I would make around, we've talked about if we could get just 100 levels or 40 levels, then polish it up. And I would test in the cheap. I wouldn't start in the US, because that would most likely be your main market. So I would start in something like, let's say, Brazil or Turkey would also be an option. To test in the cheaper market, so you can still get a lot of play. In general, you say you need around at least 100, but maybe more than 1,000 players per day to be able to validate your retention metrics and other potential revenue metrics as well, right? And maybe you need even more. So if you need 1,000 players on day 7 and only, let's say, 15% of your players this day, then you need to buy a lot. So buying them in something like Brazil, where the price is way lower, is a good idea. With publishers, I mean, I would make sure to have if you have metrics, that's the best, right? But you can also, if you have a concept for something playable, try to pitch it for them. I have talked to several people that also funds the development of casual games, and with a whole nother revenue share than what we have in hypercasual. So I think that's a very positive thing. I talked to a publisher who said they would expect around 2 to 4% revenue share for them, and the developer gets the rest. So I mean, that's not a type of deal I've heard about in hypercasual. So I think there's something interesting in talking with publishers as well in casual.
Thank you so much. And the very short, fun question for today: how do the economics work? What's the best way to publish casual games for publishers through publishers, or self-publishing is a better option?
I mean, of course, that will be very much up to your studio, right? For us, we plan on self-publishing it, mainly because actually there's less UA risk, or the upfront money you need for hyper-casual game to launch that. With ABC Runner, we use more than $1 million in the first month. And as a startup, of course, if you're bigger, it might not be an issue. But if you're the size as we are, we would need to raise a lot of money. And there's also still some risk in hyper-casual when you start scaling, will keep holding up. So we actually need fewer money to the start scale in casual. So I think that would depend very much on the team we have hired in. We have a new COO/CMO who has a lot of experience on the casual industry. So we feel confident to publish it ourselves. Also, because then you don't have to share the money with a publisher, right? But I wouldn't be against using a publisher either. If they can help you and your team to get to where you want to be, like achieve your goals, sure, do it.
Thank you so much. We have one more question left, but I'll address it to the chat. If you could be so kind and enter it in the general chat, I would appreciate. Thank you. Thank you, really. We will meet today once more pretty soon. And at the moment, thank you so much for your speech, and have a great day. See you soon.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.